everyone. This week we're going to work on section 15.4, the sense of vision. And when you learn about the eye, it's kind of like when you learned about the digestive system. You learn the names of the parts and what they do, and they function in a very specific order. So you want to know the order of those parts. And if you can learn all that, or if you understand all that, then when you hear about a disease, you can knowing what it does, what a part does when it's normal, then you realize, oh, if that part isn't functioning normally, you can kind of figure out what would happen with the disease. So learn the normal parts, the order, their normal function, and then add on the abnormal conditions as you go along. So if we look at here, we have the anatomy and physiology of the eye, and there's a lot of parts and vocabulary right here. So here we have the outer layer of the eye, the part, when you look at the whites of your eyes, it's called the sclera, and it's very fibrous. You can imagine that, remember we had connective tissues have a lot of fiber in them, and that sclera is really tough. It is, there's a good reason why most of us have not poked our eyes out, because it's a very thick, tough layer. And if you took a live class in lab, we would probably dissect eyeballs. And you can really see it's hard to cut into that sclera. And that's very fortunate because it's a really good safety measure. And so all the part where we have the white of our eye, then we have the front of the eye where you can see through that, and that's going to be the cornea. So the cornea is continuous with the sclera. And the cornea, here it says it's known as the window of the eye. And that's is what it is. It's where the light enters the eye and it kind of bends the light to go into the eye. If we look at another big layer, it's called the choroid. So I like it down here where it shows you the outermost layer here is the sclera, and in the very front it's the cornea. And then the next deeper layer is called the choroid. And that's actually kind of a dark layer, but what all these little speckles in there are, is they're trying to show you there's a lot of capillaries in there. There's a lot of blood vessels in there. And this is a very vascularized section of the eye. And so it's going to supply nutrients to the underlying retina, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it also has a lot of dark pigment. And what that prevents is when the light comes into the eye, this dark layer prevents there from being like star-like glare. Did you ever, when you're driving at night, notice sometimes you'll see like people's car lights and it just looks like a star, and it's really hard to see because of this glare that you see. And without that choroid, we would see a lot more bright kind of glare, star-like halos around bright things. If you think about somebody who you've probably met or seen somebody who's albino, which means genetically they didn't inherit genes to make melanin. They don't make dark pigment. So in addition to their skin and hair being very light in color, their choroid is going to be very light. And a lot of people that are albinos will wear sunglasses outside all the time, or even inside, because the lights just glare and it's too, they get too much of a halo around them. So the pigment in the choroid can be really important and really helpful. Let's see. Associated, let's see. So if we're on the layer of the choroid, on that same layer, if we go around the front, so all this pink stuff is the choroid, but if we go around the front, now it becomes continuous with all this stuff right here. And you can see we have what we call the iris and the pupil. And so when you're looking in the mirror and looking at the color of your eyes, what you're looking for is your iris. Now your iris is actually a muscle, but it's a kind of unique muscle that it's circular and it has a space in the center. The space in the center of the iris is called the pupil. It's just a hole. So when you look in your eyes, you see the color of your eye. That's your iris. It's a muscle. And what it does is it controls the size of the hole, the black dot in your eye, which is called the pupil. So when you look when you're looking at somebody and looking into their eyes, the pupil is just a dark space. I was surprised at times when I was in a live class and students would be dissecting an eyeball, and I'd have people looking for the pupil, waiting for this little black thing to fall out. But I'm like, no, it's just it's a dark hole. You're looking into a dark space into your eye, and so the pupil looks dark. So the iris is the colored part of your eye. It controls the size of the pupil, which probably most of you are aware is critical to control the intensity of the light. We've all seen things that are too bright, and it's very uncomfortable. And so what happens is your pupil, your iris will constrict, make your pupil smaller and in bright light, and your iris will, I'm sorry, your iris relaxes. It relaxes and it makes your pupil smaller, or it constricts and makes your pupil larger. So it's going to respond to the amount of light that's surrounding you. Let's see. So the other thing that's continuous with this choroid layer is this big structure right here, and it's called the lens. And the lens is actually kind of surprising. Again, when you dissect an eyeball, the lens does come out, and it's very hard. I've had students try to cut it in half with a scalpel, and it's very hard and almost rubbery. It's not very flexible, but it is very, very slightly flexible, but it's quite hard, and it's almost round, but it's actually, you can see here they draw it as oval. And when you cut it open, it kind of looks the same all the way through because it's more like layers of protein. And I've heard people describe it as kind of layers like an onion, but it's very compact and very hard. And what the lens is going to do is that's going to focus the light coming through your eyes. So the light's going to come here through the cornea. It's going to kind of bend a little bit. We're going to talk about the fluid here in a minute. It's going to pass through this lens, but the job of the lens is to focus the image clearly onto the inside layer of the back of the eye. And so this is going to be kind of the fine focus of the images coming in our eyes. So our lenses do need to move ever so slightly. You can see here, I don't think I have it on your list, but you can see here some muscles attached to that lens that are kind of pulling it and changing the shape of the lens ever so slightly to focus that image. Let's see. Here they're talking about this fluid called aqueous humor. Turns out there's two different fluids associated with the eyeball. There's one up front in the front layer here called the aqueous humor. And that fluid is behind the cornea, but in front of the lens. So if you look at somebody, it's easy to look at cats. Cats have these kind of bulging eyes. And if you look at a cat's eye from a side view, you can see kind of right through the front of it. And that's where the aqueous humor is. It's the space between the cornea and the lens. So there's this fluid that circulates there. And these little holes right there are to absorb that fluid back, and the fluid's kind of made here in the front of the eye. So it kind of circulates in the front of the eye, and you've got to realize that our eye parts need nutrients and generate waste just like all other cells. So you need to deliver those and remove waste. But what usually does that? Blood. And you don't want blood circulating in the front of your eye because that will make everything look red. And so we have this subset of blood without the red blood cells and without the white blood cells in the front of our eye that helps us provide nutrients to the front of the eye, and that's called the aqueous humor. So humor is an old-fashioned word for fluid. So the watery fluid is the one that's showing up right here. Okay. Oh, so we'll go on to one of our first diseases. This actually is a really important disease. If you've ever gotten an eye check, you've been checked for this disease. And my cousin, who is a pediatric ophthalmologist, told me if he had anything to tell people about their eyes, it would be have them tested for glaucoma. Glaucoma is a disease related to the aqueous humor. So I told you this fluid is made and it's reabsorbed. So we have a circulation of fluid going through the front of our eye. But if you make more aqueous humor than you reabsorb, then you get a disease called glaucoma, and it's characterized by pressure forming in the front of the eye. Now that could be uncomfortable. Actually, you don't really even feel it, which is why my cousin told me make sure people get glaucoma tests, because you can have glaucoma and not even know it. And it's one of the common reasons why people lose their vision. What can happen is this pressure builds up in here, which pushes pressure into here, which pushes pressure back here and squishes the retina. And so we're going to talk about the retina in just a minute. But glaucoma is a very important disease and relatively common one associated with too much aqueous humor. Okay, so let's see. So let's talk about the retina. Actually, I'm going to skip here to the vitreous humor. So if we go through the cornea, through the aqueous humor, through past the iris, through the pupil, through the lens, I'm going to end up in this big space here. And this space is actually kind of filled with a jelly-like substance. And that jelly-like substance is the second fluid in our eyes. It's called the vitreous humor. And the vitreous humor, it really does look like jelly, but it's clear. And it's going to be in the eye, and it's going to help push the retina into next to this choroid layer. So you really need the retina, and we're going to talk about that in a second. You really need the retina to touch this choroid layer, because the choroid is where the vascular system is. That's where the nutrients are, and that's where wastes are removed. So the whole inside of the eye is a jelly-like substance called the vitreous humor. That fluid actually doesn't circulate. It stays the same your whole life. And so you're not going to get new vitreous humor as you age. So I think I'm going to take a break right there, and we can start at retina in the next video.